A new area that we have got into from the genetics field is the science of nutrigenomics. This is whereby you would identify the nutritional requirements of an individual based on their genetics. We all know that you can feed the same horses exactly the same. You can feed a bunch of horses exactly the same thing, but they will respond, some of them will respond differently to that feeding regime or nutritional regime, and that's likely because of their underlying genetic differences. So last year in Europe and just this year in Australia, we launched the world's first nutrigenomic supplement for horses. So this is a scientifically based research supplement that is targeting horses with a specific genetic type. Nutrigenomics is the science of the interaction between nutrition and genetic differences between individuals. And the idea is to optimize the nutritional regime with respect to an individual's genotype or genome. And what we found is that horses with the different speed gene types actually have different requirements for a nutritional element called CoQ10 or coenzyme Q10. And therefore we developed a product that we call EnerGene Q10. The reason that this there are different requirements for CoQ10 in the CC, CT and TT horses is that we know that sprinters and stayers have very different metabolic and physiological requirements for the different exercise that they undertake. Energy is produced predominantly through two main pathways. The aerobic pathway, which uses oxygen and is very efficient in producing very high levels of energy in the form of ATP, versus anaerobic production of energy, which doesn't use oxygen, uses other substrates to produce energy in the form of ATP, but it's not as efficient. Horses that are trained and competing over longer distances tend to depend more on oxidative or aerobic production of energy, whereas sprinters tend to rely more on anaerobic production of energy. And that's because it takes the lag time that takes a considerable amount of time for oxygen to be taken into the horse and into the lungs and then delivered to the muscle. And it's estimated somewhere around 50 seconds. So by that point, most sprint races are close to being over by the time oxygen can actually be delivered to the muscle to be used in aerobic production of energy. So sprinters tend to rely heavily on anaerobic. For aerobic production of energy, oxygen must go through this cycle. It's called the electron transport chain, or the Krebs cycle, the electron transport chain within the Krebs cycle in the mitochondria to produce ATP. Oxygen to be converted to ATP requires this coenzyme Q10. It's required in order to move the oxygen along this transport chain to be converted into energy. Any deficiency in CoQ10 in the muscle cell there will be a required move from aerobic production of energy to anaerobic production of energy, and this causes fatigue, because the byproduct of anaerobic metabolism is lactic acid, and lactic acid buildup in the muscle is what actually causes fatigue. So you want to try to prolong the aerobic energy production as long as you can, and the way to do that is to make sure that you have sufficient CoQ10 supplies in the muscle. The reason that it's different between CCs and CTs and TTs is that the different types have different proportions of the different fiber types. I already mentioned at the very beginning that CC horses have significantly more of the type 2X fibers. These are the fast glycolytic fiber types, so they're anaerobic fiber types. And then versus the oxidative fiber types, the type 1 and the type 2A fibers are the oxidative fiber types. TT horses also have more mitochondria than CC horses, so you would expect the mitochondria are the energy producing parts of the cell where this conversion of oxygen to energy takes place. TT horses naturally have more mitochondria because they have more of the type 1 and type 2A fibers. But we found that they have less of this CoQ10. So you can see here CoQ10 is the cog that is required to convert oxygen into energy. We found that TT horses naturally produce less of this CoQ10. So even though they have more mitochondria, they have less efficient mitochondria, less efficient in converting oxygen into energy. What we found is that when we supplemented in the lab, so this is in vitro in petri dishes essentially, when we added CoQ10 into muscle cells that were CC, CT and TT muscle cells, we were able to restore the levels back to the average levels for CCs and CTs. In a field trial, we also looked to see if we could do this in vivo in live horses. So we had access to 19 thoroughbreds that were untrained. They were all kept in the same farm under the same management conditions at pasture. And we supplemented them, or orally supplemented them with CoQ10 by syringe feeding them every day for 9 weeks. So that's 19 horses every day for 9 weeks with CoQ10. And we took muscle biopsy samples from these horses before the supplementation period and after the supplementation period. And we found that the CoQ10 levels increased by 40% in the muscle after supplementation. There's two really important things that this tells us. The first thing is that the CoQ10 that we have in our EnerGene Q10 is bioavailable. There are very few supplement products that actually show that the supplement gets to the site of action where it's required. It may be a case of in one end and out the other, unless it's actually demonstrated that it gets to the site where it's working. So we now know that the EnerGene Q10 gets to the muscle where it's needed, and that supplementing with CoQ10 can significantly increase the levels of CoQ10. This should then allow for more efficient energy production, because it'll allow a more sustained use of aerobic production of energy. It will delay fatigue by prolonging aerobic capabilities. As I said, you want to prevent the switch to anaerobic metabolism, because that's where you're going to get the lactic acid buildup and therefore fatigue. So it will delay fatigue by increasing the amount of time that horses can exercise aerobically. Another really important point is that horses that are supplemented with CoQ10, we expect to have faster recovery between exercise. That's because during rest periods between exercise bouts, so I mean work days or high intensity exercise, the main point of that rest period is to replenish glycogen stores, and during that process they need to use energy in some way. So the major energy pathways are aerobic. So if you can actually fuel their aerobic pathways, they will actually recover quicker from high intensity exercise and should be able to exercise more. While we do think that this product will have greater effects in TTs because they are more dependent on aerobic energy production, we do believe that this will also be beneficial for CCs in the training regime, because they should be able to recover from their exercise more quickly. So this product is now on the market here in Australia. Kelvin from Electron is here, and he's our supplier in Australia. Hopefully all of you have signed up for the draw at the door for a tub of EnerGene Q10. If you haven't, please do on your way out. We're also offering a speed gene test as well to the lucky winner. But it's definitely worth a try. We have over 40 trainers here in Australia that are using the product. Many of the Melbourne Cup runners were on this product this year, we're delighted to say.